The Garden Letters. Every Tuesday morning, a 73-year-old widow left the same small bouquet of daisies at the doorstep of a luxury senior living facility. Until one day, the facility director found something hidden beneath the flowers. A letter that would expose a conspiracy so shocking, it would change everything we thought we knew about elder care in America. Welcome to Wisdom Stories. Today's shout-out goes to Dorothy watching from Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for being part of our amazing community of wise women who refuse to be invisible. To get a shout-out from us, kindly give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. Every Tuesday morning before dawn breaks over the hills of Maplewood, 73-year-old Eleanor Hayes walks the same path she's walked for 3 months now. Her arthritis makes each step painful, but she doesn't stop. Her silver hair is always perfectly styled, her clothes pressed and neat, but her eyes carry a sadness that seems too heavy for her small frame. In her weathered hands, she carries a small bouquet of white daisies, the kind that grow wild behind the old church where her husband used to volunteer. She walks slowly but with purpose, past the coffee shop where young people hurry by without seeing her, past the bank where she worked for 37 years before retirement, past the houses where families are just waking up to start their busy lives. Her destination is always the same: Sunset Manor, the most expensive senior living facility in the county. A place with manicured lawns, marble fountains, and a waiting list longer than most people's arms. The kind of place where wealthy families send their parents when they want the very best care money can buy. Eleanor has never been inside. She can't afford a place like this. Her modest pension and Social Security barely cover her small apartment across town. But every Tuesday, she stops at the gleaming entrance, kneels down despite the pain in her knees, and places those daisies by the heavy oak doors. The security guard, Marcus, watches her through the glass windows. He's seen her dozens of times now. This elegant woman who comes and goes like a ghost. She never speaks to anyone, never asks to come inside, just leaves the flowers and walks away, disappearing into the morning mist. The residents sitting in the grand lobby sometimes notice her through the windows. They whisper among themselves, "Who is she? What does she want? Why doesn't she come inside like a normal visitor?" But Eleanor never explains. She just places the daisies carefully, stands up slowly, brushing dirt from her wool coat, and walks back the way she came. No one knows why she comes. No one knows what she's hoping for. And no one knows that hidden beneath those innocent flowers, she's been leaving something else. Something that could bring down the entire facility and expose secrets that powerful people have killed to keep quiet. It was colder than usual that Tuesday morning in early November. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. Frost covered the perfectly maintained gardens of Sunset Manor, and the fountain in the courtyard had a thin layer of ice forming around its edges. Margaret Wells, the facility director, arrived earlier than usual that morning. At 55, she was a sharp woman who ran Sunset Manor with military precision. Everything had to be perfect, every detail managed, every problem solved quietly before it could become a scandal. She was reviewing the weekly reports when Marcus, the security guard, knocked on her office door. "Miss Wells, there's something you need to see." Margaret looked up from her papers, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" "Marcus, I'm busy. It's about the woman who leaves the flowers. The elderly lady who comes every Tuesday." Margaret had heard about the flower woman from staff members, a harmless old widow, probably lonely, maybe confused, not unusual for their type of facility. "What about her?" "This morning when I went to remove the flowers before the residents saw them, I found something else." Marcus held up a small envelope. It was hidden underneath the daisies. Margaret's expression changed. She took the envelope carefully, noting how it trembled slightly in her hands. Her name was written on the front in careful, old-fashioned handwriting: Margaret Wells, Director. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly. The message was brief but clear. "I know what happened to my sister Rose. I know what you did to her in room 237. I have proof. We need to talk. Eleanor Hayes." Margaret's face went pale. She sat down heavily in her leather chair, her hands shaking as she read the note again. Rose Hayes. Room 237. After all these years, someone had found out. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need you to pull all the security footage from this morning. And I need the files on Rose Hayes, immediately." "Yes, ma'am." "Should I call the police about the trespassing?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "No police. Not yet. This is a delicate matter. After Marcus left, Margaret locked her office door and walked to the window overlooking the entrance. The daisies were still there, innocent and beautiful, but now they felt like a threat. She pressed her fingers against the glass and whispered, "How did you find out, Eleanor? And what exactly do you think you know?" Room 237 had been empty for 6 months now. Officially, Rose Hayes had died peacefully in her sleep of natural causes. A sweet old woman whose family rarely visited, whose passing was noted with a small obituary in the local paper and a brief memorial service attended by 3 people. But Margaret knew the truth. Rose Hayes hadn't died naturally, and if Eleanor Hayes had proof of what really happened, everything Margaret had built, everything she'd worked for would come crashing down. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She paced her luxury apartment, wineglass in hand, trying to figure out how much Eleanor actually knew and how to stop her before she could expose the truth. From her third-floor apartment window, Eleanor Hayes watched the lights in Sunset Manor flicker off one by one as night settled over the facility. She had been watching for months now, learning the patterns, understanding the routines, waiting for the right moment. Rose had been her older sister by 8 years, the strong one, the smart one, the one who had taken care of Eleanor after their parents died young. Rose had worked as a nurse for 40 years, saving every penny, planning for her retirement. She had enough money to afford Sunset Manor, enough to live comfortably for her remaining years. "I want the best care available," Rose had told Eleanor 6 months ago as they toured the facility together. "I've worked hard all my life. I deserve to be somewhere beautiful for my final chapter." Eleanor had been skeptical. She didn't trust places that seemed too perfect, too polished. But Rose was determined, and she had the money to afford it. Within a week, she had moved into room 237, a corner room with windows overlooking the garden. For the first month, Rose seemed happy. She called Eleanor every few days, talking about the activities, the food, the other residents. "It's like a luxury hotel, Ellie," she would say. "I should have done this years ago." But then the calls became less frequent. When Eleanor visited, Rose seemed tired, confused. "I'm fine," she would insist, but Eleanor could see she wasn't. Her sister was losing weight, forgetting things, seemed drugged or sedated. "Maybe it's just adjustment," Eleanor told herself. New place, new routine. Then Rose stopped calling altogether. When Eleanor tried to visit, she was told Rose was sleeping. "She's having a difficult day," the nurses would say. "Perhaps try again tomorrow." But tomorrow was always the same. Rose was always sleeping, always having a difficult day, always unavailable. Eleanor began to suspect something was wrong, but she had no proof, no authority to demand answers. Then came the call she had been dreading. "Miss Hayes, this is Margaret Wells from Sunset Manor. I'm so sorry to inform you that your sister Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep last night." She went very peacefully, no pain. Eleanor's world shattered. She hadn't even been allowed to say goodbye. By the time she arrived at the facility, Rose's room had already been cleaned out, her belongings packed into boxes, her bed stripped and remade for the next resident. "Where are her medical records?" Eleanor had asked. "I want to understand what happened." "I'm sorry," Margaret had said with practiced sympathy. "Patient privacy laws prevent us from sharing detailed medical information, even with family members. But I can assure you she received the very best care." Eleanor knew she was lying. She could see it in Margaret's eyes, hear it in her too smooth voice. But what could a 73-year-old woman do against a powerful institution with teams of lawyers? That's when Eleanor decided to become invisible. Old women were invisible anyway. She realized people looked right through them, dismissed them as harmless, irrelevant. She would use that invisibility as a weapon. For 3 months, Eleanor had been conducting her own investigation. She left flowers every Tuesday not out of grief, but as reconnaissance. She watched the staff patterns, learned which nurses worked which shifts, figured out which residents were isolated from their families. And slowly she began to uncover the truth. Dr. Patricia Chen had worked at Sunset Manor for 2 years as the head physician. At 42, she was respected in her field, known for her compassion and dedication to elderly care. She genuinely cared about her patients and took pride in providing them with dignity and comfort in their final years. But lately, something had been bothering her. Too many residents seemed to be declining faster than their medical conditions would suggest. Too many deaths that, while not technically suspicious, didn't feel right to her experienced medical eye. Rose Hayes had been one of them. Rose had arrived at Sunset Manor in relatively good health for an 81-year-old. Some arthritis, mild hypertension, but nothing life-threatening. She was alert, engaged, looking forward to the social activities and comfortable living arrangements. But within weeks, Rose began showing signs of confusion, lethargy, and rapid physical decline. When Dr. Chen ordered additional tests to understand what was happening, Margaret Wells intervened. "Rose is clearly suffering from dementia," Margaret had said. "It's progressing rapidly, as it sometimes does. Let's focus on comfort care rather than aggressive testing." "But her symptoms don't align with dementia progression," Dr. Chen had protested. "I'd like to run more comprehensive blood work, maybe consult with a neurologist." "Doctor, I appreciate your thoroughness," Margaret had replied coldly, "but I think you're overthinking this. Rose is 81 years old. These changes are natural. Let's not put her through unnecessary procedures." Dr. Chen had felt pressured to comply. Margaret Wells had significant influence with the medical board, and crossing her could mean career suicide. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When Rose died 3 weeks later, Dr. Chen was troubled by how quickly the family was discouraged from requesting an autopsy. Margaret had handled all the arrangements, assured everyone that Rose had died peacefully of natural causes, and had her cremated within 48 hours. "It's what you would have wanted," Margaret told Eleanor during their brief meeting. "Quick, simple, no fuss. Rose always said she didn't want to be a burden." But Rose had never said that. Eleanor knew her sister had wanted to be buried next to their parents in the old cemetery outside town. She had planned her funeral years ago, set aside money for it, even picked out the headstone. Now, sitting in her apartment reviewing the notes she'd been keeping, Dr. Chen realized Rose's death fit a pattern she'd been unconsciously tracking. 7 residents in the past year had died under similar circumstances. All had been relatively healthy upon admission. All had declined rapidly. All had died within 3 to 4 months of arrival, and all had been cremated quickly with minimal family involvement. Dr. Chen opened her laptop and began pulling medical files. If there was a pattern, she was going to find it, and if someone was harming the residents under her care, she was going to stop them. Margaret Wells sat in her office reviewing the security footage from that morning. There was Eleanor Hayes, small and fragile-looking, placing her daisies by the door. The camera angle didn't show her hiding the envelope, but it confirmed what Marcus had told her. Margaret had hoped Eleanor would eventually give up her weekly visits and move on. Grief made people do strange things, and she had assumed the flower ritual was just an old woman's way of dealing with loss. She never expected Eleanor to figure out what had really happened to Rose. But Margaret had underestimated Eleanor Hayes, and now she had a serious problem. Sunset Manor wasn't just a luxury senior living facility. It was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to separate wealthy elderly residents from their assets as quickly and quietly as possible. Margaret had been running the scheme for 5 years, and it had made her extremely wealthy. The process was simple and almost undetectable. Residents were carefully selected based on their financial assets and family involvement. Preference was given to those with substantial savings but limited family contact, widows and widowers whose children lived far away or were too busy to visit regularly. Once admitted, residents were gradually given medications that would accelerate cognitive decline and create dependency. Nothing that would show up in standard tests or raise immediate suspicion. Just enough to make them confused, compliant, and unable to manage their own affairs. Within a few months, Margaret would gain power of attorney, claiming the resident was no longer capable of making their own decisions. She would then systematically drain their accounts, selling their homes and investments under the guise of paying for specialized care. When the money was gone, the residents would die, sometimes of genuine medical complications brought on by the medications, sometimes with a little more direct assistance. Their deaths were always attributed to natural causes: heart failure, stroke, complications from age-related conditions. The bodies were cremated quickly to prevent anyone from requesting autopsies. Families were told it was what their loved one wanted, that they had died peacefully, that there were no suspicious circumstances. Over 5 years, Margaret had stolen nearly $12 million from 38 residents. The money was carefully laundered through offshore accounts and fake medical supply companies. To the outside world, she was a dedicated healthcare administrator. In reality, she was a serial killer motivated by greed. Rose Hayes had been victim number 39. She had arrived with over $400 0 in savings, a paid-off house worth $200, 0, and a portfolio of conservative investments worth another $150, 0. By the time she died, Margaret had transferred most of it to her own accounts. But Eleanor Hayes was proving to be more persistent than most family members. Most people accepted the official explanations and moved on with their grief. Eleanor was asking questions, conducting her own investigation, and now she claimed to have proof. Margaret needed to know exactly what Eleanor knew and how she had obtained her information. More importantly, she needed to stop Eleanor before she could expose the entire operation. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed a number she had hoped never to use again. "It's me," she said when a gruff voice answered. "I have a problem that needs to be handled discreetly." An elderly woman named Eleanor Hayes. "She's been asking questions about her sister." "How discreet are we talking?" the voice asked. "Permanent," Margaret replied. "Make it look natural. Heart attack, stroke, something believable for a 73-year-old woman. It'll cost extra for someone that age, more planning required. Money isn't an issue, just make it quick and clean." Margaret hung up the phone and walked to her window. Eleanor Hayes had no idea what kind of forces she was up against. By this time next week, there would be 2 Hayes sisters in the crematorium, and the secret of room 237 would be buried forever. Eleanor had been a librarian for 40 years before her retirement. She knew how to research, how to find information that people wanted to keep hidden, and how to build a case piece by piece. Over the past 3 months, she had been creating a comprehensive file on Sunset Manor and the suspicious deaths that seemed to cluster there. She started with public records, obituaries, property transfers, probate filings. What she found alarmed her. In the past 5 years, 38 residents of Sunset Manor had died and been cremated within 72 hours of death. In each case, significant financial assets had been liquidated shortly before or immediately after death. Houses sold, investment accounts closed, life insurance policies cashed out. Most disturbing, in 26 of those cases, Margaret Wells had been granted power of attorney within 6 weeks of the resident's admission to the facility. Eleanor cross-referenced these findings with medical records she obtained through a friend who worked in the county health department. The pattern became even clearer. Residents who arrived in relatively good health were showing rapid cognitive decline and dying within 3 to 6 months. But Eleanor's most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Dr. Patricia Chen. Eleanor had been watching the facility for weeks when she noticed Dr. Chen leaving work late one evening, looking troubled and carrying a thick folder. Eleanor followed her at a distance to a nearby coffee shop, where Dr. Chen sat alone, reviewing documents with obvious distress. Working up her courage, Eleanor approached the doctor's table. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen. I'm Eleanor Hayes. Rose Hayes was my sister." Dr. Chen looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Ms. Hayes. I remember Rose. I'm so sorry for your loss. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about my sister's care." Dr. Chen glanced around nervously. "I'm not sure I should. Patient confidentiality and all." "Rose is dead," Eleanor said quietly, "and I don't think she died naturally." Dr. Chen studied Eleanor's face for a long moment, then gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down, but I need you to understand, if I tell you what I suspect, it could be dangerous for both of us." That conversation 3 weeks ago had changed everything. Dr. Chen had confirmed Eleanor's suspicions and provided medical documentation that proved residents were being systematically drugged and robbed before being murdered. Together, they had compiled evidence that would expose the entire conspiracy. But they both knew that going to the police immediately might not work. Margaret Wells had connections, influence, and resources. She could make evidence disappear and witnesses change their stories. They needed undeniable proof and media attention to ensure the truth couldn't be buried. That's why Eleanor had decided to leave the note. She wanted Margaret to know that someone was onto her. To make her nervous, to force her into making mistakes. She also wanted to draw Margaret into a direct confrontation where Eleanor could record their conversation and get a confession. What Eleanor didn't know was that Margaret Wells was far more dangerous than she had imagined. And that by leaving that note, she had just signed her own death warrant. Dr. Chen was working late in her office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Margaret Wells. "Patricia, I need to see you immediately. My office." Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Margaret's voice was cold, controlled, threatening. "It's almost 9 p.m., Margaret. Can't this wait until morning?" "No, it cannot. We need to discuss some irregularities I've noticed in your recent patient files. I think there may be some misunderstandings about the level of care some of our residents have been receiving. Dr. Chen understood the threat. Margaret knew she had been asking questions, reviewing files, connecting dots. This was a warning to back off or face the consequences. I'll be right there, Dr. Chen said. She hung up the phone and quickly made copies of all the documents she and Eleanor had compiled. She put one set in her safe at home, mailed another set to her sister in California with instructions to open it only if something happened to her, and uploaded digital copies to a secure cloud server. Then she drove to Sunset Manor knowing she was walking into a trap but having no choice. Margaret was waiting in her office, sitting behind her large desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. The office was dimly lit and Margaret's face was partially in shadow. "Sit down, Patricia." Dr. Chen sat in the chair across from Margaret's desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I understand you've been conducting some unauthorized research into our residents' medical histories," Margaret began, "and I believe you've been sharing confidential patient information with outside parties. I've been reviewing medical files as part of my job responsibilities." Dr. Chen replied carefully, "And I haven't shared any confidential information inappropriately." Margaret smiled, but it was cold and predatory. "Don't lie to me, Patricia. I know you've been meeting with Eleanor Hayes. I know you've been discussing her sister's case. And I know you've been developing some very dangerous theories about the quality of care we provide here." Dr. Chen realized there was no point in denying it. Margaret clearly had sources of information she hadn't anticipated. "I have concerns about the unusual number of deaths we've had recently. And yes, I've discussed some general medical observations with Ms. Hayes. She deserves to understand what happened to her sister." "What happened to Rose Hayes," Margaret said slowly, "is that she died of natural causes related to her age and medical condition. Just like all of our residents who pass away. It's unfortunate, but it's the natural order of things." "Rose Hayes was murdered," Dr. Chen said quietly, "just like 37 other residents. And you're responsible for all of them." Margaret's expression didn't change. "That's a very serious accusation, Dr. Chen. The kind of accusation that could destroy a person's career, their reputation, their entire life. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You have no proof of these wild theories. You have no evidence of wrongdoing. What you have is the word of a grief-stricken old woman who can't accept that her sister died naturally." Margaret stood up and walked around her desk, stopping directly in front of Dr. Chen's chair. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop reviewing old files. You're going to stop meeting with Eleanor Hayes. You're going to stop spreading rumors about this facility. And you're going to remember that your medical license, your career, and your future depend entirely on your ability to be a team player." Dr. Chen stood up to face Margaret directly. "And if I don't, then you'll find yourself facing a malpractice lawsuit that will destroy your career. You'll discover that former patients have come forward claiming you provided substandard care. Medical boards will investigate you for professional misconduct. Your reputation will be ruined, and you'll never practice medicine again." Margaret walked to the window and looked out at the darkened grounds. "I've built something important here, Patricia. A place where elderly people can live out their final years in comfort and dignity. I won't let anyone destroy that based on conspiracy theories and unfounded accusations." Dr. Chen realized she was fighting a battle she couldn't win with Margaret Wells directly. Margaret had too much power, too many resources, too many ways to destroy people who opposed her. But Eleanor Hayes was still out there, still gathering evidence, still fighting for her sister. And together, they might be able to expose the truth in a way that Margaret couldn't stop. "I understand," Dr. Chen said quietly. "You've made yourself very clear. I'm glad we could have this conversation," Margaret replied. "I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings between us." Dr. Chen left Margaret's office knowing that she was now in serious danger. But she also knew that Eleanor Hayes was in even greater danger. She needed to warn Eleanor that Margaret was onto them and that they needed to act quickly before Margaret could silence them permanently. She drove straight to Eleanor's apartment, hoping she wasn't already too late. Eleanor was reviewing her evidence files when she heard a soft knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw Dr. Chen standing in the hallway, looking nervous and frightened. Eleanor opened the door immediately. "Patricia, what's wrong? We need to talk, and we need to be very careful. I think we're both in danger." Eleanor led Dr. Chen to her kitchen table, where she had spread out months of research photographs, documents, timelines, financial records. It looked like the work of a professional investigator rather than a grieving sister. Margaret Wells knows we've been meeting, Dr. Chen said without preamble. She called me into her office tonight and threatened to destroy my career if I don't stop investigating the deaths at Sunset Manor. Eleanor felt her heart skip. How could she know we've been meeting? I don't know, maybe security cameras, maybe informants among the staff. But she definitely knows, and she's scared enough to threaten a physician, which means she's feeling cornered. Eleanor sat down heavily. At 73, she suddenly felt every one of her years. I should have been more careful. I should have realized that a place like that would have sophisticated security. Eleanor, listen to me. If Margaret is threatening me, someone she needs to maintain her medical credibility, then she's already planning something much worse for you. She sees you as a more serious threat because you're the one driving this investigation. What do you think she'll do? Dr. Chen hesitated, then decided Eleanor needed to hear the truth. I think she'll try to kill you and make it look like a natural death, heart attack, stroke, something believable for a woman your age. Eleanor absorbed this information with surprising calm. Then we need to act quickly. Tomorrow I'm going to the police with everything we've collected. That might not work, Dr. Chen warned. Margaret has connections, influence. She could make our evidence disappear or discredit us before anyone takes us seriously. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Chen had been thinking about this during the drive to Eleanor's apartment. We need to force her to confess, get her on record admitting what she's done. And we need to do it in a way that creates immediate public attention so she can't cover it up. Eleanor leaned forward, interested. How? Your note worked. It got her attention, made her nervous. What if we arrange a meeting with her? But this time we record the conversation. If we can get her to admit even part of what she's done, we'll have enough evidence to force a real investigation. That's very dangerous, Eleanor said. If she's really willing to kill people to protect her secret, meeting with her could be suicide. It is dangerous, Dr. Chen agreed, but I think it might be our only chance to stop her before she kills again. And Eleanor, she is going to kill again. She's not going to stop just because we're asking questions. She's going to eliminate the threat we represent and then continue exactly as before. Eleanor thought about Rose, about all the other families who had lost loved ones to Margaret's greed, about the future victims who would die if Margaret wasn't stopped. How would we do it? Dr. Chen outlined a plan. Eleanor would call Margaret and request a private meeting to discuss what she knew about Rose's death. She would suggest that perhaps they could reach some kind of understanding, maybe even imply that she was willing to be bought off. They would meet in Eleanor's apartment, which Dr. Chen would wire with recording devices. Dr. Chen would hide in the bedroom, ready to call police if things went wrong. If they could get Margaret to admit to even one murder, it would be enough to trigger a full investigation. It's risky, Dr. Chen acknowledged, but I think it's our best chance. Eleanor nodded slowly. At her age, she had less to lose than most people. And if she didn't do something, Margaret would continue killing innocent elderly people for their money. When should we do this? As soon as possible. Tomorrow night. The longer we wait, the more time Margaret has to plan something against us. They spent the next hour planning every detail. Eleanor would make the call to Margaret in the morning, setting up the meeting for the following evening. Dr. Chen would bring professional-grade recording equipment from the hospital. They would have backup plans in case Margaret became suspicious or violent. As Dr. Chen prepared to leave, Eleanor grabbed her arm. Patricia, if something goes wrong tomorrow night, if I don't survive this, I need you to promise me something. Don't talk like that. Promise me you'll make sure the world knows what really happened to Rose. And to all the others, promise me their deaths won't be forgotten. Dr. Chen looked into Eleanor's determined eyes and saw the strength that had driven this elderly woman to take on a powerful killer when everyone else had given up. I promise, Eleanor, but you're going to be fine. We're going to stop her. And we're both going to be fine. Eleanor smiled, but they both knew she might not survive the next 24 hours. Margaret Wells had killed 38 people to protect her secret. She wouldn't hesitate to kill 2 more. The next morning, Eleanor called Sunset Manor and asked to speak with Margaret Wells. Miss Hayes, Margaret said when she came on the line, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I think it's time we had a conversation, Eleanor said carefully, about my sister Rose and about what I know regarding her death. There was a long pause. I see. What kind of conversation did you have in mind? A private one. I think we may have some mutual interests to discuss. Margaret understood immediately. Eleanor was offering to negotiate, perhaps to be bought off. I think that could be arranged. When and where would you like to meet? Tonight, 7 o'clock, my apartment. Eleanor gave Margaret her address. I'll be there, Margaret said. And Ms. Hayes, I think you'll find me quite reasonable when it comes to resolving misunderstandings. After hanging up, Eleanor called Dr. Chen. It's set. She'll be here at 7 tonight. How did she sound? Confident. Like she thinks she's dealing with a foolish old woman who can be easily handled. Good. That means she won't expect the level of preparation we've done. I'll be there at 5 to set up the recording equipment. Eleanor spent the day making final preparations. She wrote a detailed letter explaining everything she and Dr. Chen had discovered, sealed it in an envelope addressed to the FBI, and gave it to her neighbor with instructions to mail it if she didn't retrieve it within 48 hours. She also called her niece in Oregon and had a long conversation about family memories. Without mentioning her investigation, if something happened to her, she wanted her last conversation with family to be about love, not death. At 5 o'clock, Dr. Chen arrived with a bag of professional recording equipment. They placed tiny microphones throughout Eleanor's living room, testing to make sure every word would be captured clearly. Dr. Chen would hide in the bedroom with headphones, listening to everything and ready to call police if Eleanor was in danger. Remember, Dr. Chen said as they finished the preparations, your goal is to get her talking. Act like you're willing to make a deal, but try to get her to explain what happened to Rose. Don't accuse her directly, let her think she's in control of the conversation. Eleanor nodded. At 73, she was about to confront a serial killer in her own living room. But she wasn't afraid. She was angry. Angry for Rose. Angry for all the families who had been robbed of their loved ones. Angry at a system that allowed predators to target the most vulnerable members of society. At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a knock at Eleanor's door. Eleanor opened the door to find Margaret Wells standing in the hallway. Margaret had dressed carefully for this meeting, expensive but understated clothing, professional demeanor, a briefcase in her hand like she was arriving for a business meeting. Ms. Hayes, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please come in, call me Eleanor. Margaret entered the apartment and looked around appraisingly. It was small but neat, filled with the accumulated possessions of a long life: family photographs, handmade quilts, books, a piano that had probably belonged to Eleanor's parents. The home of a woman of modest means but good taste. You have a lovely home, Margaret said, settling into the chair Eleanor indicated. Very comfortable. Thank you. Can I offer you some tea? Coffee? Tea would be lovely. Eleanor went to the kitchen to prepare tea, her hands steady despite the circumstances. In the bedroom, Dr. Chen listened through headphones, confirming that the recording equipment was working perfectly. Eleanor returned with the tea service and settled across from Margaret. For a moment, they sat in silence, two older women who might have been friends meeting for a social visit. I imagine you want to discuss your concerns about your sister's care at our facility, Margaret began. I have a lot of questions about what happened to Rose, Eleanor said carefully, and I think you might have some answers. Margaret smiled. I'm sure I can help clarify any misunderstandings. Sometimes, when we're grieving, we look for explanations that aren't really there. Rose was in good health when she entered Sunset Manor. Within weeks, she was confused, lethargic, declining rapidly. That doesn't seem like natural aging to me. Dementia can progress very quickly, especially after a major life change like moving to a care facility. The stress can accelerate cognitive decline. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, but Rose didn't have dementia when she was admitted. I know my sister. I know what dementia looks like. Our mother had it. Rose was sharp, alert, managing her own affairs perfectly well. Margaret's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes grew colder. Eleanor, may I ask what you think happened to Rose? I think she was murdered, and I think you killed her. The accusation hung in the air between them. Margaret set down her teacup carefully. That's a very serious allegation, Margaret said quietly, the kind of thing that could be considered slander if you repeated it to the wrong people. It would only be slander if it weren't true. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. Eleanor, I understand you're grieving. I understand you're looking for someone to blame for your loss. What if I told you that Sunset Manor would be willing to make a generous donation to a charity of your choice in Rose's memory? Say $50,000? As a gesture of goodwill? You want to buy my silence? I want to help you through your grief and avoid unnecessary legal complications for both of us. Eleanor shook her head. I don't want your money, Margaret. I want the truth. I want to know exactly what you did to my sister. Margaret's facade of pleasantness began to crack. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Eleanor, you're a 73-year-old widow living on Social Security in a one-bedroom apartment. I run a multi-million-dollar healthcare facility. I have lawyers, connections, resources you can't imagine. If you try to make trouble for me, I will destroy you. The way you destroyed Rose. Margaret stood up and walked to Eleanor's window, looking out at the street below. When she turned back, her expression had changed completely. The mask of professional courtesy was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Your sister was a foolish old woman who couldn't mind her own business, Margaret said quietly. She started asking questions about the other residents, wondered why so many people seemed to get sicker after they arrived. She even tried to contact some of their families. Eleanor's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. So you killed her to keep her quiet? Margaret laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. Killed her, Eleanor? I helped her. Rose was old, confused, living on a fixed income with no real family support. I gave her a purpose in her final months. What kind of purpose? She helped fund important medical research. Her assets went to advancing healthcare for the elderly. Her death contributed to something greater than her small, insignificant life ever could have. Eleanor realized Margaret was completely delusional, justifying mass murder as some kind of charitable work. You stole her money and murdered her for it. I liberated resources that were being wasted and put them to better use. Rose had over $700,000 sitting in conservative investments, earning minimal returns. I invested that money in facilities and programs that helped thousands of elderly people. By murdering them, Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. By ending their suffering efficiently. Do you know what it's like to work in geriatric care, Eleanor? To watch people deteriorate slowly, losing their dignity, their independence, their minds. I provide them with a quick, peaceful exit while ensuring their resources go toward helping others instead of enriching pharmaceutical companies and long-term care profiteers. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. Margaret had convinced herself that she was some kind of humanitarian, saving elderly people from suffering while stealing their life savings. How many people have you murdered, Margaret? I've helped 41 people transition peacefully while ensuring their assets were used responsibly. 41. 3 more than Eleanor had documented. Margaret was still killing. And you think that makes you a hero? Margaret sat back down, her demeanor calm again, as if they were discussing the weather. I think it makes me practical. These people were going to die anyway. Eleanor, I simply accelerated the timeline and ensured their money went to worthy causes instead of being wasted on futile medical interventions. Worthy causes like your offshore bank accounts? Margaret smiled. I deserve compensation for the service I provide. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to orchestrate 41 deaths without arousing suspicion? The planning, the attention to detail, the emotional labor of comforting families while managing logistics? Eleanor felt sick. Margaret wasn't just a killer, she was a narcissistic sociopath who genuinely believed she was performing a public service. What about the families, the people who loved them? The families who rarely visited, the children who were too busy with their own lives to spend time with aging parents? Most of them were relieved, Eleanor, relieved not to have to deal with the burden of elderly relatives, relieved to receive life insurance payouts without having to pay for years of expensive care. You're insane. Margaret's expression hardened. I'm realistic. I understand that elderly people in this society are viewed as burdens, drains on resources, inconvenient reminders of mortality. I simply work within that reality to create optimal outcomes for everyone involved. Eleanor realized she needed to get more specific information before Margaret became suspicious about the length of their conversation. Tell me exactly what you did to Rose. Margaret seemed almost eager to share the details, like a proud craftsman explaining her technique. Rose was more challenging than most because she was naturally suspicious and medically knowledgeable from her nursing background. I had to be more subtle. She leaned forward, warming to the subject. I started with mild sedatives mixed into her evening medication, just enough to make her drowsy and compliant. Then I gradually introduced drugs that would create confusion and memory problems, nothing that would show up in standard blood tests, but enough to make her seem like she was developing dementia. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. but she forced herself to remain calm. What kind of drugs? A combination of antihistamines, benzodiazepines, and anticholinergics. Individually, they're common medications used for legitimate purposes. Together, in the right doses, they create cognitive impairment that mimics dementia or delirium. And then, once Rose was sufficiently impaired, I had her sign a new power of attorney document. She was confused enough that she didn't really understand what she was signing. I told her it was a routine update to her admission paperwork. Eleanor felt tears building but refused to let them fall. You tricked her while she was drugged. I helped her make financial decisions she was no longer capable of making rationally. Within 2 months, I had transferred most of her liquid assets to accounts managed by the facility. Her house was sold to pay for specialized medical care, and when the money was gone, Margaret's tone became matter-of-fact, clinical. I increased the sedation gradually until she was essentially comatose. Then I administered a concentrated dose of morphine and midazolam. She died peacefully in her sleep without pain or fear. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to control her rage. Rose had trusted these people to care for her. She had paid them to keep her safe and comfortable. Instead, they had drugged her, robbed her, and murdered her. The autopsy would have shown the drugs in her system, Eleanor said. There was no autopsy. I convinced you that Rose wanted to be cremated immediately. Remember? By the time her body was reduced to ashes, any evidence was gone forever. Eleanor looked directly into Margaret's cold eyes. You're going to prison for this. All of it. Margaret laughed again. Based on what evidence? The paranoid theories of a grief-stricken old woman? Even if you went to the police, which you won't, what could they prove? The bodies are gone. The medical records show natural deaths. The financial transactions were all properly documented. She stood up and walked toward the door. This has been an interesting conversation, Eleanor, but I think we're finished here. I'm going to give you one piece of advice: drop this nonsense and get on with your life. You're 73 years old. You should be focusing on enjoying your remaining years, not chasing fantasies about conspiracies. I'm not dropping anything, Eleanor said firmly. I'm going to expose you for what you are. Margaret turned back, her expression deadly serious. No, Eleanor, you're not. Because if you try to cause problems for me, I'll make sure you have the same kind of accident your sister had. Natural death, quick cremation, case closed. At your age, no one would question it. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Leave this alone, or you'll join Rose sooner than you planned. Margaret opened the door and paused. Oh, and Eleanor, I know about Dr. Chen. I know she's been helping you with your little investigation. It would be a shame if something happened to her medical career or her life. She has so much more to lose than you do. After Margaret left, Eleanor sat in her chair, trembling with rage and grief. In the bedroom, Dr. Chen had recorded every word. They had everything they needed to expose Margaret and her murder scheme. But Eleanor knew Margaret wasn't bluffing about the threats. She had killed 41 people and shown no remorse. She would kill again to protect herself. Dr. Chen emerged from the bedroom, her face pale. Eleanor, we did it. We have her complete confession on tape. This is enough to put her away forever. Eleanor nodded, but she was thinking about Margaret's threats against Dr. Chen. Patricia had risked everything to help expose this conspiracy. Eleanor couldn't let her be harmed because of it. Patricia, I need you to leave town tonight. Go to your sister's house in California. Stay there until this is over. I'm not abandoning you now. We're in this together. Margaret will kill you, Eleanor said simply. She has nothing to lose at this point. She'll eliminate anyone who threatens her, and you're a bigger threat than I am because you have medical credentials that give you credibility. Dr. Chen started to protest, but Eleanor cut her off. Please. You've done enough. You've helped me get the evidence we need. Now let me finish this. Reluctantly, Dr. Chen agreed. She made copies of the recording and uploaded them to secure servers. She prepared packages of evidence to be sent to the FBI, the State Medical Board, and 3 major newspapers if anything happened to her or Eleanor. Before leaving, she hugged Eleanor tightly. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. I'm not brave, Eleanor replied. I'm just angry, and at my age, I don't have much left to lose. After Dr. Chen left, Eleanor called the FBI field office in the city. She spoke to Agent Sarah Martinez, explaining that she had evidence of multiple murders at a senior care facility and requesting an immediate meeting. Ma'am, these are very serious allegations, Agent Martinez said. Are you sure you want to make this kind of report? I have a recorded confession, Eleanor said. The facility director admitted to killing 41 elderly residents and stealing their assets. I have documentation, financial records, and audio evidence. There was a pause. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I'd like to hear what you have to say and review your evidence. I'll be there at 9 o'clock, Eleanor said. But Agent Martinez, the woman who made these confessions, knows I have this evidence. I believe she's going to try to kill me before I can present it to you. Ma'am, if you're in immediate danger, you should call local police. The local police might not take me seriously. I'm a 73-year-old woman making accusations against a respected healthcare administrator. But murder is murder regardless of who commits it or who the victims are. Eleanor hung up the phone and prepared for what might be her last night alive. She organized all her evidence, made sure copies were safely stored with people Margaret couldn't reach, and wrote a final letter explaining everything in case she didn't survive until morning. Then she sat in her favorite chair, Rose's photograph in her hands, and waited. Margaret returned to Sunset Manor in a state of controlled fury. Eleanor Hayes was more dangerous than she had anticipated. The old woman wasn't looking for money or closure, she was looking for justice. And that made her extremely dangerous. Margaret had built her operation carefully over 5 years, creating systems and procedures that made detection nearly impossible. But Eleanor's investigation had been more thorough than Margaret expected. If Eleanor really had evidence, if she went to the authorities, everything Margaret had built would collapse. She sat in her office, considering her options. Eleanor had to be eliminated, and it had to look natural. A heart attack would be perfect, believable for a 73-year-old woman, especially if she was under stress. Margaret picked up her phone and called the same number she had used before. It's me again. The Eleanor Hayes problem needs to be resolved tonight. Tonight? That's very short notice. It'll cost double. I don't care what it costs. Just make it clean and make it look natural. Consider it done. Margaret hung up and walked to her window overlooking the grounds of Sunset Manor. In a few hours, Eleanor Hayes would be dead, and the secret of room 237 would be safe. Dr. Chen would get the message and stop her investigation. Everything would return to normal. But even as Margaret made these plans, Eleanor's evidence was already in motion. Dr. Chen had uploaded copies to secure servers with instructions to release them automatically if she didn't check in every 24 hours. Eleanor had left packages with neighbors to be mailed to federal authorities if she disappeared. The conspiracy that had claimed 41 lives was about to be exposed. Regardless of what happened to Eleanor Hayes, at 2:17 a.m., Eleanor was awakened by a sound from her kitchen. She lay still, listening, trying to determine if she had imagined it. Then she heard it again, the soft scrape of a window being opened. Someone was breaking into her apartment. Eleanor reached for the phone beside her bed, but there was no dial tone. The line had been cut. She heard footsteps moving carefully through her living room, heading toward her bedroom. Whoever was in her apartment was trying to be quiet, but Eleanor's hearing was still sharp. She eased out of bed and moved to her bedroom window. It opened onto a fire escape that connected to the apartment building next door. It was her only escape route. The footsteps were getting closer. Eleanor opened her window as quietly as possible and climbed onto the fire escape. The metal was cold and slippery, and her arthritis made every movement painful. But she forced herself to keep going. She made it to the platform between floors when her bedroom light came on. Through the window, she could see a figure dressed in black, wearing gloves, searching her room. When he didn't find her in bed, he would search the rest of the apartment. Eleanor continued down the fire escape, moving as quickly as she dared. At the second floor, she could climb through a window into the adjacent building, which she knew was empty and under renovation. But as she reached for the window, her foot slipped on the icy metal. She grabbed for the railing, her heart pounding, managing to catch herself before falling. The noise echoed in the alley below. Through her bedroom window, she saw the intruder's head snap toward the sound. He had heard her. Eleanor abandoned stealth and moved as fast as she could. She forced open the window to the adjacent building and climbed through, cutting her hand on broken glass but not stopping. Behind her, she could hear the intruder climbing onto the fire escape. Eleanor was now in a construction zone, exposed beams, missing floorboards. No lights. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate toward the front stairs, hoping to reach the street before the intruder could catch her. But her pursuer had a flashlight too, and he was much younger and faster than she was. Eleanor reached the ground floor and ran toward the front door. But it was locked and chained. The building was sealed for renovation. She was trapped. Behind her, she could hear footsteps on the stairs. The intruder was taking his time now, knowing she had nowhere to go. Eleanor looked around desperately. The building had a basement entrance. Maybe she could hide there until morning, until people would be around to help. She found the basement door and hurried down the steps. The basement was full of construction equipment, old furniture and boxes. It smelled of mold and decay. Eleanor found a hiding spot behind a large heating unit and turned off her phone's flashlight. In the darkness, she tried to control her breathing, tried to be completely silent. Footsteps echoed on the floor above her. The intruder was searching the building systematically. Eleanor heard him find the basement door. The footsteps started coming down the stairs. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure he would hear it. A beam of light swept across the basement, back and forth. Searching, the intruder was being methodical, checking every possible hiding place. The light moved closer. Eleanor could hear him breathing now, could smell his cologne. In a few seconds, the light would find her, and it would all be over. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the sound of sirens. The intruder cursed and clicked off his flashlight. Eleanor heard him running back up the stairs, moving quickly toward the rear of the building. The sirens were getting closer. Eleanor waited until she was sure the intruder was gone, then carefully made her way back upstairs. Through a front window, she could see police cars pulling up outside her apartment building. She used her phone to call 911. "This is Eleanor Hayes. Someone just tried to kill me at my apartment building. I'm hiding in the construction site next door." Within minutes, police officers were escorting her to safety. The intruder was gone, but he had left evidence behind: fingerprints on her window, footprints on the fire escape, signs of forced entry. More importantly, Eleanor was alive and still had all her evidence against Margaret Wells. As she sat in the police station giving her statement, Eleanor realized that Margaret had made a critical error. By trying to have Eleanor killed, Margaret had confirmed that everything Eleanor suspected was true. No innocent person would respond to accusations with attempted murder. When Agent Martinez arrived at 6 a.m. to interview Eleanor, she found a 73-year-old woman who had spent the night fighting for her life but was still determined to see justice done. "Show me your evidence," Agent Martinez said. Eleanor played the recording of Margaret's confession. Agent Martinez listened in silence, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "This is enough for multiple arrest warrants," Agent Martinez said when the recording ended. "We'll bring in a full team to investigate Sunset Manor and exhume bodies for autopsy." "What about Margaret? She'll try to destroy evidence or flee the country." "Not if we arrest her first." Agent Martinez made a phone call. Within an hour, FBI agents were surrounding Sunset Manor. Margaret Wells was arrested in her office as she was frantically trying to delete computer files and shred documents. Dr. Chen was contacted in California and flown back to testify. Other staff members at Sunset Manor, faced with federal charges, began cooperating with investigators and providing additional evidence of the murder scheme. The story broke on national news that evening. "Elderly serial killer exposed by 73-year-old sister," read the headlines. Eleanor's courage in investigating her sister's death and confronting Margaret Wells made her a national hero. But for Eleanor, the real victory came 3 weeks later when the first bodies were exhumed and autopsies confirmed the presence of the drugs Margaret had described. Rose Hayes and 37 other victims finally had physical evidence of their murders. Margaret Wells was charged with 41 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Facing overwhelming evidence, including her own recorded confession, she accepted a plea deal that would put her in prison for life without the possibility of parole. Dr. Chen was cleared of any wrongdoing and was praised by the medical board for her courage in exposing the conspiracy. She established a foundation to improve oversight and protection of elderly residents in care facilities. Eleanor became an advocate for elder rights, traveling the country to speak about the vulnerability of senior citizens and the need for better protection against financial exploitation and abuse. The final victory came 6 months later when Congress passed the Rose Hayes Act, requiring federal oversight of senior care facilities and establishing new protections for elderly residents against financial abuse and medical neglect. Eleanor kept her promise to Rose. Her sister's death was not forgotten. Instead, it became the catalyst for changes that would protect thousands of other elderly people from similar fates. On the first anniversary of Rose's death, Eleanor returned to Sunset Manor, which had been closed and was being converted into a community center for senior citizens. She placed daisies at the entrance, not in grief this time, but in remembrance of a sister who had fought back even when she was being murdered, and whose love had given Eleanor the strength to seek justice against impossible odds. Standing there in the morning sunlight, Eleanor remembered Margaret's words, "You're a 73-year-old widow living on Social Security. What can you possibly do?" Eleanor smiled, thinking of the 41 families who finally had answers, the legislation that would protect future elderly residents, and the killer who would spend the rest of her life in prison. "Quite a lot, as it turns out," she said quietly to Rose's memory. "Quite a lot indeed." The investigation revealed that Margaret had stolen over $15 million from her victims over 5 years. The money was recovered and returned to the families of the deceased. Several other senior care facilities were investigated and found to have similar problems, leading to criminal charges against administrators and staff members. Eleanor lived to see sweeping reforms in elder care, improved oversight of senior living facilities, and better protection for vulnerable elderly people. She died peacefully in her sleep 4 years later at age 77, surrounded by family and friends who considered her a hero. Her obituary called her a woman who proved that age is no barrier to courage, and that one person with determination can change the world. But Eleanor would have preferred a simpler description: a sister who kept her promise. If this story of courage and justice moved you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Wisdom Stories for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share this video with the strong women in your life who refuse to be silently overlooked. Remember, dear friends, that wisdom and courage don't diminish with age, they often grow stronger. Never let anyone tell you that you're too old to fight for what's right. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the person everyone else has stopped listening to. Until next time, keep sharing your wisdom with the world. We need your strength, your experience, and your unwavering sense of justice now more than ever. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next story of remarkable women who changed the world simply by refusing to give up.